We move voluntarily to feel good. We move to get stronger. We move for peace of mind. And some of us move involuntarily, repeatedly. Hello and welcome to Tick Fit, the podcast about meaningful movement, a platform to discuss Tourette syndrome and its effects on our bodies. We'll speak with elite movement professionals where we can advocate and educate about Tourette syndrome, while the Tourette community can benefit from the expertise of these movement professionals. We'll also speak with experts on Tourette syndrome so we can learn a little bit more about what's going on in the Tourette's brain. I'm your host, Raquel Cunningham, and I've been on a quest for the past 2 decades to learn more about the connection between movement, exercise, and our ticking muscles. This is not meant to diagnose or treat Tourette syndrome. There is no cure for Tourette. We are here to advocate and educate about Tourette syndrome through conversation, and anything in this podcast is for informational purposes only. Please always consult with your doctor before beginning any exercise program to make sure that it is right for you. So first and foremost, this is advocacy and education through conversation. We might end conversations with more questions than answers, but all of this is hoping to build off of what we know about Tourette and what other things that we can progress and move forward, other correlations we might be able to study, and other options that might help your ticking body feel better. A recent study came out that 87% of us with tics have pain from our tics, and we will cover a lot. Again, this has been 2 decades worth of studying, correlating, investigating, and now time to share. So what I'm also helping to do with this podcast is to build resources between movement professionals, trainers, occupational therapists, physical therapists, neurologists, psychologists, sleep specialists. There's a lot to cover. There's a very popular picture of an iceberg, and the tip of the iceberg, the little bit that you see on top, are the physical and motor tics that other people can see. And down below the surface is everything else, all of these other co-occurring conditions and symptoms and things that we have to deal with in a life living with Tourette. So hopefully we can tap into a little bit of all of that and give more options to explore and help your body feel a little bit better. So you will never hear me use words like control, suppress. That's not possible. We don't suppress tics. We don't stop tics. The 2 most popular words about describing tics are uncontrollable and jerky. This is not a controllable condition, but there are ways to manage, cope, mask, and this is for you, the individual with tics, to get through your day. If there's things that you can do because you don't want to be ticking while you're taking a test or while you're having a work meeting, there's a movement to tick freely. And that comes from the education and advocacy portion, that the more people that know about tics, the more we're free to just tick freely without judgment or stigma. What I hope to get to is a point where you might have some other tools in your tool belt to manage your tics for your life. That's the objective here. And that's part of this whole resource building and bridge connecting journey that we find ourselves on. So I really think that the movement community will be actually intrigued to learn more about Tourette's and the many different ways that they manifest within our bodies, this vast realm that tics can present themselves. And I think the ticking community can really learn from these movement professionals other cues, other ideas to approach moving your body. I think that the gym is a loud place. What a great place for you to go tick freely, move your body, feel good. And the more people in that world that know about tics, how much more wonderful would that be that you can show up to a gym and they know, and then you just move on. That's the coolest part. So I want that for you. I hope that for you. And that's what we are trying to do for all of us. So what does a tic feel like? I just mentioned that the 2 most popular words that you'll see that describe tics are uncontrollable and jerky. Repetitive probably being that 3rd one. But what does it feel like? If we were to talk about the pacing and tempo of a tic, If you think of a squat might have a 2-second lowering component and then a 2-second lifting component. So 2 seconds to descend, 1, 2, 2 seconds to ascend, coming on up, 1, 2. And what do ticks feel like? Ticks feel like Morse code, where you have like a little beep and then a long beep and then a little beep and a long beep, and it's random and all over the place. There's usually an urge that can either precede the tick, that they call a premonitory urge, and there's something that we have to do to satisfy that urge. So within that Morse code analogy, it could be the small little beeps that help your tick feel better. It could be the long beep. For me personally, kind of that long beep is where honestly pain happens more, that you really like push into that pain, because ticks are not biomechanically sound. We don't tick into good position. We don't tick into relief. Ticks are painful, and sometimes that pain is the tick, and that is the satisfactory part of the urge. So I actually really like this Morse code analogy because they're random, they're all over the place, and that's kind of the best way that I can describe the pacing and the jerkiness of a tick. And they will come out in different sentences. It could just be a continual beep, 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 beep. When they are random and all over the place, if it's a long sentence, a long Morse code tick storm coming out, they call a tick storm. When you're in the middle of a tick storm, sometimes you just have to let it ride. And then sometimes you might be able to slow down and understand the beeps between, and maybe there's something we can do within those beeps to either downshift and reduce the intensity of the tick. There might be something to reduce the frequency of the tick. If we can reduce the urge to tick, reduce the intensity of a tick, or reduce the frequency of a tick, I think that is where our management system lies. Again, it's not suppressing the tick. It's not stopping the tick. Those are not possible. We want to discuss a management system. How do you manage something that you don't know when it comes on, how fast it's going to come on? I think training, exercising is an incredible awareness world for us to step into. There is a really popular, it's the only studied non-pharmaceutical approach to Tourette's called CBIT, and we'll have some CBIT experts on in some later episodes to basically go over what that is and why exercise can help, why movement can help. So we kind of have to take away what our thoughts of exercise and movement are, whatever precognitions we have of it. You think exercise, you think high intensity, you think gym, you think that fast, crazy 160 beats per minute in the cycle studio, whatever it is. That might work for you, but not for everybody. It's a very individualized thing, which is why we find ourselves here in this podcast, so that we can discuss every aspect of training, every aspect of ticks, and you can find what resonates best for you, depending on what your ticks are, how your body moves without ticks, and so on and so forth. So how did this come to be? How did my start to movement and my Tourette diagnosis lead us to where we are after studying movement? So when I was little, I was actually severely bow-legged. I kind of grew out of that, but not kind of, I did. But I was a mover from the get-go. I started walking at 7.5 months, and normally you walk around anywhere between a year and 18 months, and I did not. So I was a mover from the get-go. I was diagnosed with Tourette at 5 years old, and that was right around the time that I also started swimming. And that's when I felt my tics the most, or they came out in an entirely different way. And even at a young age, I could realize I could almost play with them in the water. My most persistent tic to this day is stomach clenching, stomach pressure pushing, I guess you'd say, and a really heavy sniffle. And I've had many tics throughout my life. They've all manifested in different ways. They've waxed and waned, but those are still my most persistent ones to this day. And when I was swimming, You can't breathe whenever you want. You can't sniffle whenever you want. But that's when I would play with it. I would have this in-out sniffle. So if we think of that Morse code analogy, in, out, in, out, in, out, and I would get close to the surface of the water to see what would happen. And, sure enough, what do you think would happen? I'd suck up water up my nose. And that would also happen while I'm swimming. So I'd be swimming and just stall right in the middle of the lane. And when you're on swim team, there might be 5 to 8 of you in a lane. And if you stall, you back up the traffic. So you normally have the faster kids in the first few positions, and then it goes on so that you don't stop traffic. I would constantly have to switch my position in the lane. I was not a consistent swimmer throughout the strokes or just in general. My tics had a big part to do with that. I'd be swimming and I would have to kick my ankle out to the side. It would almost break to the side in a supinated position. And that's just part of living life with tics and doing the activities that you want to do. Even when I would be running, I would still kind of have that ankle kick out tic. Not so much anymore. And it's impossible to say whether my tics have naturally subsided over the years, which is a possibility, or whether it's a result of practicing everything I'm hoping to share with you. Maybe it's both. But regardless, there's very much something to this. And I hope to share it with you and that you might find something that works for you too. So that was my swimming years. And then I actually went on to become a water polo player. I think my position in water polo was a goalie. And there's something also about the reactionary training that I went through that was wildly beneficial for me. It really helped me focus. It helped me learn how to focus in a repetitively fast environment, which is reaction training. If you have somebody shooting water polo balls at a fast pace, you have to find that calm in the storm to be able to accomplish the goal. And I really loved it very, very much. I like reaction training. There was a card game that we used to play during all of our water polo tournaments, and it was kind of like slapjack, but a little more advanced, a lot of extra rules. And that was my jam. The reaction training on that was such a fun place to be, to find this not panicked brain state of fast movement. And again, we're going to look at all of this. I think that might be a reason why some kids feel this duality of video games, this fast, reactive state that might increase their tics, because stress is a very common tic trigger, but also this fast moving, fast decision making world. So this duality of this fast decision making world does something to help me focus, but then it also increases tics because there's a high stress component. Well, is that reaction training? Is that there's just so much to dive into. But I mean, that's just my swimming water polo reaction training years. Now I am a seasonal swimmer, and I switched to land. When you play water polo, egg beater or treading water is how you stay afloat. Everybody thinks that's the hardest part about water polo. Once you learn how to do it, you can keep yourself afloat for a long time. It's the constant back and forth swimming. It's swimming while people are trying to pull you under. It's trying to turn people while you're swimming and switching directions. And that actually becomes the harder part of it all. But treading water is an incredibly unnatural movement where you're internally rotating yourself to stay afloat. When you move to land, there's nothing on land that replicates that, except I will say I've taken a couple silks class. It's the fabric that hangs from the ceiling. That is a treading motion where you have to internally rotate and wrap your leg around the fabric to help pull yourself up. That was really cool. That was the only land-based exercise that mimics treading. But are you really on land? Because you're up in the air. So again, I still kind of maintain there's not really any land-based activities that do that. My point being, when I switched to land, I had to completely learn how to repattern my movements. You don't run and kick your feet out to the side where your knees are going in. Even when you switch directions and you work on cutting, yes, you can turn in like that, but it's not a rotation in. I had to completely retrain my body onto land. There's a really popular exercise called a peel-off press that works your obliques. And when you press out the cable straight in front of you, the cable's coming off from the side, you're supposed to be feeling the inside abdominal muscles. I wouldn't. I would feel the outside abdominal muscles. And I tried this with a couple other water polo players, and they were the same. So there's something to be said about the sport specificity. How you train is specific to the stimuli that you're giving your body for that sport. And there's a few training principles that are going to guide us with how we train our ticking bodies to minimize the impact that these repetitive motions will have on us for years to come. So that's my land switch and repatterning. And I thought about, kind of different career trajectories, and ended up being recommended a gym that had a really high reputation for training its trainers. And I loved it. That started my career as a strength and conditioning coach, where I started chasing movement. And I chased animal flow, TRX, kettlebells, Pilates, everything with movement. And a lot of these different movement disciplines have different breathwork components to it. Swimming was what taught me that breathing was a safe place for my tics. That was a place that downshifted me. It was also a place where I could let them out. At the end of high school, at the end of the day, when you head to swim practice, sometimes practice in the morning as well, but at the end of the day, faces in the water, nobody can see you. You can tick as much as you want. Is it going to slow your pace down? Yes, of course, but it was adaptable. It was flexible. Maybe it was a slow day and I'd be one of the last ones in the lane because I knew I had to tick more. It was a place to let them out, and it was a place to understand breath rate. Our breath is not rationed in other sports the way that it is in swimming. When you run, you don't get one breath and then 3 steps, one breath, 3 steps, but you do in swimming, and you get a rhythm with it. You take a breath in, and then you might take 3 to 5 strokes. Take a breath in, take 3 to 5 strokes. And it was a really cool way to figure out life with Tourette. We can talk more about that in later episodes as well. But I've also heard from several other swimmers that it helped with facial tics, it helped with breathing tics, it helped with tics in general. I think swimming is an incredible trainable space for breath rate, for tics, for rhythm, for downshifting. There's a lot to be said about the connection between breath rate and swimming. It's also a place where you can see it. You can see your breath come out if you're breathing really hard, really fast. Think of that Morse code. You can see it. And I think visualization is powerful too. So obviously, with a really heavy breathing tic, sniffle tic, stomach clenching tic, that was really cool to see the effect of that tic come out right in front of me in bubble form. So once I became a trainer, again, chasing every different movement discipline, I did suffer an injury. I actually have, it's currently now type 2 or grade 2 spondylolisthesis. There are these metal steps at a gym, and they're kind of like nesting dolls where they sit inside each other, that I was picking one up that was sitting inside the other one that was stuck, and just started wrestling with it. I didn't know it was stuck. And that was the straw that broke the camel's back, literally, because spondylolisthesis is when your vertebra, not the disc, but the vertebra shifts out of place. And I have been able to manage that without surgery for over 10 years now. So there's a lot of personal connection to pain and learning how to work with your body, the importance of joint mobility, learning the difference between joint mobility, joint stability, muscle flexibility, muscle strength, different types of muscle contractions. And to learn that from a personal perspective, and then on the professional side as well, having chased movement and understanding how everything is related. What I hope to do, that injury is really what helped me understand kinetic chain, how one part of our body being injured affects so many other parts. And with tics, if you have repetitive tics, if you start to get pain with one area of your body because of these repetitive tics, if you look at the kinetic chain that ticking body is a part of, how can we choose the best exercises for that body that might help get that ticking body part out of pain? And this is a huge, long conversation, but that's what we're going to do in the podcast here, talking with different movement professionals and understanding how they deal with asymmetries in the body. Our bodies are all naturally asymmetrical. Having asymmetrical bodies is just part of life. Look at every sport. If you play baseball, you're throwing with one hand. If you play volleyball, you're hitting with one hand. If you golf, you're golfing on one side. I had a lot of symmetry tics as well. If breath hit my arm in one area on my wrist, I had to do my sniffle tic until it felt the exact same on the other side. If I was running and my foot accidentally, the tip of my toe caught the sidewalk or scraped it, I would have to run and in a natural run, try to scrape it on the other side. You can imagine how fun that would be running on a treadmill or running outside, trying to scrape your toe so that it felt the same. So all of these different feelings and sensations are something that can be part of our awareness training when we're in the gym. How does grip feel? How does muscle tension feel? And there's a lot of different tools that we can use to help that understand that about ourselves. So we're at the point now in this movement journey to keep learning, which is what I did, chasing down the Strong First Kettlebell cert, taking the Pilates apparatus cert, taking the pregnancy and postpartum cert. There's a lot of different movement disciplines that I've studied, and now it's time to share. It's time to share and discuss Tourette's with the movement professionals so that somebody with Tourette's can step into a gym, and a movement professional, myself included, should not be telling you, I'm going to fix your tics. I'm going to help this. If anybody says that, run. They don't get it. Tourette's is not something to be cured. It's not something to be fixed. But we can help our bodies feel better. I did a presentation called How to Build an Exercise Program with Tic Considerations, where in an hour, I try to cover the entire spectrum of training with a teal lens over it. Teal is the color of Tourette's awareness, trying to explain how we can choose and what variables we have to choose from that an individual can adapt and individualize depending on what their body, how it moves without tics, what their body's tendencies are, and then how that body moves with tics, what those tics are on that body. And we talked about pain itself being a trigger. There's a lot of people that are hypermobile, and that hypermobility can be a tic trigger as well. If you have a tendency to sublux or extend beyond what is considered a normal range of motion for a joint, to push that into a different position. And so I will link that in the podcast notes. It's very wordy, it's very long, but I wanted that to be a hub, a resource hub that we can come back to and discuss. Again, we might be leaving some of these episodes with more questions than answers, but I also want to put it out into the world that if somebody also wants to go on a quest and chase this down and maybe discover why this connection is, or if there's an answer to a question that we pose, that we can build upon the things that we do know help with tics, the things that we do know about the Tourette brain, and the exercise science that we do know. So there are things that we know, and I'd like to help build upon that by connecting as many dots as we can. There are a few training principles that will guide us through this, and we'll kind of go over a more wordy anatomical episode next time. But there's a few guiding principles that'll take us through here. One of them being the overload principle. How do we create adaptations in our body? What do you overload with ticks? Do you overload the ticking muscles? Well, we can we can use the sports specificity principle, but in an inside out fashion. Do we want to be training those ticking muscles, or do we want to be training those ticking muscles antagonists? And again, we'll go through all of that in more detail. The joint by joint approach is one that I really love as a kind of analysis for what each individual body is. And it's a way for you to assess where you start and what variables you can choose within a training program that will suit you best. And it's really interesting, these body puzzles that ticks create within ourselves. Any anatomy professor has a skeleton in their room. I really want a marionette puppet. I do. I want a marionette puppet with all the strings attached to all the bones, because we don't tick into anatomically correct positions. And so to show what these body puzzles, what ticks create as these body puzzles, there's movements and exercises and cues and things to help balance that out, I guess would be the best way. The ticks are going to keep coming. We know that. But is there a way to give you some relief between tick storms, between these Morse code sentences that come out? And that's what we're hoping to do here. So these body puzzles, you can imagine a little marionette puppet. I also like that analogy too, because it externalizes Tourette. It's not something that we control. There is something pulling, pushing, going, moving us into these asymmetrical positions. But let's move forward. Let's have these conversations. I'm really excited to be doing this. This has been on my mind for a very long time, and I hope to create an environment and world where you can have as many resources as possible. So remember, this is not meant to diagnose or treat Tourette syndrome. This is for informational purposes only. While I'm trying to keep this as evidence-based as possible, know that things are constantly changing. The exercise science world is changing. What we know about Tourette syndrome is constantly changing. I will always do my best to keep it as up to date as possible, but know that TickFit and the whole podcast team do not take responsibility for any actions taken based on the information provided. The intent is to educate, support, raise awareness. This is not a way to diagnose or treat any medical condition. If you have any medical condition, you need to be reaching out to your medical professional. And this also includes any guests or contributors to the podcast as well. So thank you so much for listening, and we hope to see you next time.